G'day poker people, welcome back. After getting absolutely obliterated on my Sunday afternoon session in North Carolina, I was very happy to move on with my road trip. So I spent all Monday driving up to Bensalem, Pennsylvania, checked into my hotel room, which was about half an hour away from where my brother-in-law was actually getting married. But more importantly, it was only 5 minutes away from the Parx Casino. I was really keen to check out the Parx Casino, particularly on a Tuesday, because for whatever reason, I'm still not 100% sure why, Tuesday is the day to play at Parx Casino. Apparently the room is absolutely jam-packed. There's multiple 10-10 games running allegedly, and like dozens of other games running. So it's just like the day, kind of like a Friday would typically be the day at any other casino in the world. Apparently it's Tuesday in Parx. I know this is the closest casino to Manhattan in New York, so maybe New Yorkers don't work on Tuesday or something. Whatever the case, I was keen to get in the action, so went to sleep the Monday night, got a full 8 hours sleep, so I was nice and fresh to play a day session on the Tuesday. Ended up getting to the casino at about 1:30, bought into the 2-5 game for 500, where I played these interesting hands. Let's see if we can run it up and if the Tuesday games live up to the hype. Let's go. So we are off to the races. I sit down in the 2-5 game for 500, and it's actually a 9-handed game, which personally is not my preference. I do prefer 8-handed games like we have in Florida and North Carolina as well, apparently. But it's definitely a big first world problem, so I'm not going to complain too much. And we're going to get into this first hand. The action falls to my low jack, and I look down at 10-8 of diamonds. I raise it up to 15. Definitely on the looser side of hands I'll open in middle position, but nothing too spewy quite yet. I made it 15, and then I get 3 different callers. So we go 4 ways to a flop of 9-5 deuce, rainbow with the 9 of diamonds. When the blinds check it over to me, if we're gonna have a C-bet bluff on this board, even multi-way, I think this is kind of the nutted hand to do it with. We only have 10 high, but because we have 3 of the straight flush, we're going to turn equity on a lot of turns. But even on top of that as well, if we do get check raised, like we have a pretty easy fold with 10 high. It's not like we gave up too much equity or anything. So I decide to mix in the C-bet bluff in this instance. I make it 35, and then the hijack folds, but both the blinds call. It's not quite where we wanted to see, still getting action here. We're 3 ways to a turn. Hopefully we can pick up some equity on the turn, and we do, baby, because it's the ace of diamonds. You love to see it. We do make our flush draw. And then things get interesting because a small blind actually decides to lead out for 50. Then the big blind folds. Keep this in mind for later, but momentarily the action's back on me, and I think we have a pretty clear-cut call here. We are getting direct odds to draw to our flush draw, and we have position in the hand, so I decide to throw in the call, hoping that we can hit a diamond on the river, and the river is the 2 of clubs. So no, that is not a diamond, but here's where things get kind of funky, because the small blind bets again, and they actually down bet from their previous bet. They go ahead and make it 45. So this bet is absolutely minuscule relative to the size of the pot. Having said that though, we do only have 10 high here, so I really don't think we can be hero calling with a hand this week. But having said that, I don't want to give up on the hand quite yet. I'm pretty thoroughly convinced at this point that the opponent does not have a strong hand. I think they're going to have a bunch of flush draws, including ones that have better showdown value than 10 high, plus some weaker ace-x that's kind of mixing in a blocker bet type thing. I really just don't want to fold and let them win when they have that type of range, and we could have bluffed them off of it. So I decide to mix in the bluff raise, and really the only sizing that makes any sense here is an all-in. So that's what I do. I rip it all in, and then the small blind snap folds. So very likely they did have a better flush draw or something like that, which we're pretty happy to see. But here's where things get interesting yet again in the hand. The big blind who folded on the turn, he said, "Oh my God, I had a 9. Was it good? Was it good? Can you show me?" And usually I hate showing bluffs at a poker table. I know the conventional wisdom is that that is good for the game, and sometimes it is, but I also think sometimes it's bad for the game because it's kind of just like rubbing it in the face of the person that you bluff. But the big blind had been giving lots of action, and he was a really nice guy, so I really didn't want to let him down. So I did just decide to show my bluff for that reason, and then the big blind was like, "Oh my God, I had you absolutely destroyed." So yeah, ended up showing the bluff there. I usually don't do that at the poker table, but I think this was a rare instance where maybe it wasn't the most mean-spirited thing in the world. Let me know what you think. Do you guys ever show your bluffs at the poker table? Do you think it's good for the game? So let's see if we can keep the momentum rolling in this next hand. We've got the $10 straddle on, and I know, because I'm the one that put that bad boy on. Let's go. The action folds to a active hijack player who raises it up to 30, and then literally everyone at the table calls until the action's on my straddle, and then I'm really hoping that I peel a strong hand, and I look down at pocket nines, baby, and I actually think this is a really interesting spot here with what we want to do with nines. I've talked in my previous video about how I've had an extreme bias towards over-aggression so far on the road trip. So maybe I should just flat here and chill out a bit and see if we can hit a set in a super multi-way pot. But I mean, even with that in mind, come on, bro. This is such a good sweet spot. We've got an aggressive opponent opening from the hijack and then a bunch of people calling them. I just can't imagine if we squeeze big enough that the people behind have like flattered with a monster or anything when the hijack just opens. So I think we get through them pretty easy. We just have to get through the initial raiser. So I think against an active opponent, we just have to go for it in this spot, which I do. I 3-bet it up to 200. Then the action's back on the hijack and they're in the tank and they're like staring me down, and I really think they're trying to get a read by the way they were looking at me before. After about 45 seconds of tanking, they announce all in. Everyone between us folds, and look, I didn't squeeze up this hand against an active opponent to fold for only 550 more. So I do throw in the call, expecting to be behind at least sometimes, until the hijack asks me, do I have a pair? I announce to him that I do, and he says, you're ahead then, and we watch the board run out. Queen 4 deuce, 7 of hearts, 3 of hearts, and then the hijack just says, you're good. I show my nines and he mucks. So the chances that he did have an ace king, maybe like a ace X hand that was 4-bet bluffing, very likely. But hey, the run good continues at Parx. Let's go, baby. Before we get into the next hand, I just wanted to take this opportunity to invite all of you to join the Anti-Gambling Gambling Club. Head over to leebets.com. We have a bunch of different anti-gambling gambling club t-shirts, hats, and hoodies in all different types of sizes and colors. So head over to leebets.com and join the club. But for now, let's get back into the gambling. Next hand up, we've got the under the gun straddle on again, and I know, because I put it on again, the serial straddler here. I'm just kidding. Everyone at the table consented to putting the under the gun straddle on every hand, so we're playing a bit of 2, 5, 10 from here on, and then a tight aggressive hijack opens it to 25. They get 2 callers before I look down at Queen 9 of clubs in my straddle. I decide to call here, closing the action, getting a good price. So we go 4 ways to a flop of Queen 6-6 rainbow. When the big blind checks it to me, I check it to the pre-flop aggressor naturally, who checks, as does the button player. So we do get a free turn, which is the 5 of clubs, giving us a flush draw to go with our top pair. When the big blind checks it to me this time, I definitely want to try and start to build a bit of a pot here with a hand this strong. So I go ahead and make it 40, and then only the pre-flop aggressor calls. So we're heads up to a river, which is the 8 of hearts. Now I think this is a kind of an interesting spot, whether we want to bet for value and how much we should bet if we do decide to go for value. I think the opponent's range is going to have a lot of hands that are like pocket jacks, pocket tens, pocket sevens, somewhat possible they river to full house with pocket eights, but I really want to bet to try and get value from those hands because they're not going to bet once I check it to them. So I want to bet, and I actually kind of want to use a big size because I think it's actually pretty likely that those hands will want to bluff catch me. After I showed the bluff earlier, you know, they might think I'm like a crazy guy who's just going to bluff with one of the plethora of missed draws on this board. So I think it's really a good spot to size it up a bit. Don't want to overbet or anything too crazy, just because it is somewhat possible that the opponent did river a full house, or they just have a stronger queen that was checking to induce. So don't want to go too crazy with a bet, but you want to go a bit juicier because I think it's pretty likely I get hero called. So I decide on a size of 125. Maybe if I was to nitpick, I could go a little bit bigger, like 140, 150, but whatever the case, I make a 125. And hijack's in the tank probably like 15 seconds before throwing in the call. I show my hand straight away, and then the hijack looks really disappointed. He actually asks the dealer if my 9 plays. The dealer says yes, of course, because my 9 does play. And then the opponent mucks. So they're trying to insinuate that they called with, I guess, Queen 7 suited, Queen 4 suited, which I guess isn't impossible. I'm just a little skeptical. I think it's much more likely they had a pocket pair or maybe even an ace high call if they really think I'm out of line. But whatever the case, I'm not complaining. We're raking in this pot, and it's definitely larger larger than we deserved it to be. Let's go. Next hand up, what do you know? I'm in the straddle yet again. Lee straddles. At the height aggressive hijack opens for 20. Not surprisingly, they get two different callers before I'm in the straddle with 9-8 of spades. I decide to throw in the call, closing the action, getting the best price possible. So we go four ways to a flop of 7-6 deuce with two diamonds. So we do have the open end up, but when the action checks to me, I just naturally check it to the pre-flop raiser, who checks as well. So we do get to see a free turn, which is the 5 of diamonds. So we do get there with our straight, but front door diamonds do get in, which is particularly of note when a passive big blind leads out for 50. So I'm the next to act, and look, I'm not going to fold my mate straight on the turn, of course, that will be ridiculous. But I don't think I should be raising for value here either. I actually think the big blind's going to have a lot of made flushes in their range. Being that they're a passive opponent pre-flop, they're going to call with a bunch of hands like Jack 3 suited, probably any Ace X suited. So they just have too many flushes on this board for me to expect a worse hand to call or raise. So I do decide to just throw in the call here and proceeding with a lot of caution going forward in the hand. So everyone else folds and we are heads up to a river, which is the 5 of clubs. So pretty bad river, because even if the opponent did have two pair, some of them now beat us with boats. If they'd have set, they beat us now. They do check the action over to me, and with all of this in mind, as nitty as it seems, I actually think this is a pretty clear check back spot. Like, if the opponent does have a two pair that was counterfeit, like 7-6, I mean, maybe being passive, they call a bet, but I think we're just going to run into a flush that's scared of the board pairing much more often when we bet. So I really think checking back here is the best play, as nitty as it seems. Maybe showing a bit of my over-aggression bias yet again here. I do decide to value bet. I go ahead and make it 100. Really dislike this bet. I think it's a pretty clear check, but if I do bet, I should maybe go a little bit smaller just to give a strong 7 or 7-6 a price. Whatever the case, I made what I think is a pretty silly mistake. I bet 100, and then the big blind calls straight away. I show my hand, and then they show Ace 3 of diamonds. So wow, they just check call with a nut flush draw on the river, and yeah, really bad spot to go for value. I wish I went with my read that the opponent had a bunch of flushes in their range, because clearly they did. Next hand, the same passive opponent from the last hand opens the low jack to 20. Tight aggressive cutoff calls, and the action's on my button with 5-3 of hearts. This should be a pretty trivial fold, in all honesty. You do want a somewhat wide calling range when you are going to have position during the hand on the button, especially when the villain is only using a 2x open size. But 5-3 is just pushing it way too far. Should be folding it. Maybe occasionally I could 3-bet bluff with this hand if I had a read on the low jack or something. But yeah, I decided to call in this instance. Honestly, guys, this is just straight up fishy. This is a fishy play, and obviously I'm starting to tilt somewhat, not having the discipline to fold this trash hand pre-flop. Whatever the case though, I make the mistake, I do call, and then we are 3 ways to a flop of 10-6-4 with 2 spades. The action checks to me here and could go either way between semi-bluffing or checking and trying to hit on the turn. I check in this instance, so we do get that free turn, which is 9 of hearts, so unfortunately we do not get there, and then the initial raiser bets for 30. The cutoff folds, and facing a bet that's less than half the size of the pot with our open-ended straight draw, I think we have a pretty clear call here. Not only are we going to get there on the river sometimes and be able to bet for value, but maybe we can turn this hand into a bluff on the river. I'm not thoroughly convinced that the opponent has a super strong range when they check the flop and bet small on the turn. So maybe we can get some folds on the river. So I go throw in the call. Then we heads up to a river, which is the 9 of diamonds. Low jack checks it over to me, and we have 5-5 on the river. I'm still not that convinced that the opponent has a strong hand. I mean, I suppose they could have quads that's trying to check raise, but I think stuff like 6x, maybe ace king, ace queen is much more likely, and I really don't think those hands are going to be able to call if I use a bigger bet size. So I do decide to overbet in this instance, trying to fold my opponent off of a 1 pair or ace x type hand, trying to represent a 9 or better, essentially. So that's what I do. I go ahead and bet 150, and then the low jack thinks maybe 5 seconds. I see them grab a bunch of chips, and they throw them in the middle, so that's bad news. I end up showing my hand, and then the dealer looks at me kind of confused and is like, he raised, and I notice he put $400 worth of chips in the pot. So pretty easy fold here with 5 high. Looking back on the hand though, I'm a bit suspicious. I'm actually not sure what the opponent had. I do think it's somewhat likely that they were check raising as a bluff. They're essentially repping ace 9 or better, when they check raise my overbet. So a little bit suspicious as to what they had, but can't be a hero calling them with 5 high. Especially when I've accidentally exposed my hand already. It takes away the option of 3-bet bluff here.
Okay, so we are back in the car already. Already called it quits on the session after only 3 hours of playing. Obviously, it's pretty disappointing to drive all the way to Philadelphia and then only grind for 3 hours. But I really think I made a good quitting decision just then. Not only did I play that 5-3 suited hand just absolutely awful in pretty much every way possible, it really indicated to me that, oh, I'm on tilt again with the over-aggression of bias, with the lack of discipline, and I don't want to repeat in North Carolina, so I decided to leave pretty soon after that hand. Also, the fact that the game got extremely reg heavy was definitely another contributing factor. So, I mean, the games here obviously are very, very good by some of the action that we saw, but naturally that's going to attract some good regulars. So I guess you can't really have one without the other. Right now I'm going to go eat because I'm hungry. It's probably part of the reason I'm so tilted, and then maybe come back here and grind another session later, or take a nap and then come back late at night to grind a session. But yeah, despite being disappointed that I haven't put in that much volume today, I do rate my quitting decision. So I'm gonna go eat now somewhere nice in the Pennsylvania area. Never eaten here, so definitely keen to check out some food. Let's get into it. Okay, so we ate, rested up, and now I'm getting ready to go back in and have my second session of the day. I'm actually going to stop at Chipotle before I go in for my second session. Really don't want to risk getting hungry again mid-session. I did bring some healthier foods for the road trip, but I really think just being full and sustained is more important, and I'm pretty bloody sick of eating dry roasted edamame, so I'm going to go get some Chipotle. Maybe a bad choice health-wise, but at least it will keep us sustained and hopefully gets us towards an A-grade session for my second session of the day. All right, let's get to eating.
Okay, so we're fully Chipotle'd up, full dad bod mode, ready to play some poker. And I get back to Parx at about 10 p.m, buy into the 2-5 game yet again. And that's when this first interesting hand happens. I'm under the gun with pocket queens. Let's go, the first premium we've seen in Pennsylvania. I make it 15, and then I get 2 different callers. So we go 3 ways to a flop of Jack 5-3 with 2 spades. Small blind checks it over to me. Definitely want to try and get a bit of value with my pocket queens here. I make it 25, and then a passive middle position player actually raises to 60. The small blind gets out of the way, the action's back on me, and I think we have a pretty clear call here with a hand as strong as an overpair in this spot. The opponent could be semi-bluffing with a flush draw or raising a worse hand for a kind of protection value type bet. So I'd throw in the call here, and we are off to a turn, which is the 6 of diamonds. I check it over to the opponent again, and they keep betting at it. They go 120 this time. Now, I am starting to get a little bit worried because the opponent, sure, they could have raised some worse hands for value on the flop, but on the turn, I think that changes. I actually think their value range is going to be more heavily weighted towards sets and 2 pairs. But having said that, not a lot of sets and 2 pairs on this board, particularly on the flop. So I think it's much more likely that they are bluffing or semi-bluffing, and I really can't be folding a hand as strong as an overpair when that is the case. So I do decide to throw in the call, and we are heads up to the river, which is the king of spades. Awful river, front door flush does get in. Plus, if they randomly had a king X bluff, they beat us now. So I check it over to them, and then they check back straight away. So that's really good news. I end up showing my pocket queens, and then the villain shows me the queen of hearts before mucking. So not really sure what they had. Maybe just like a random queen high bluff or queen jack that was going for thin value. But whatever the case, we're still running good in the second session of the day at Parx. Let's go. Next hand up, the table's starting to die a bit because we're down to 6 people left. I guess that's what happens when you show up to a game at 10 p.m. Whatever the case, I'm on the cutoff, and then I notice the button next to me. He's kind of already holding his cards in the air like he's about to fold. So when that's the case and I'm in the cutoff, I kind of just treat it like I'm playing my button range since they're like probably going to fold. So when I look down at 3-2 of diamonds, I decide to raise it up for 15. Fortunately, my read was right and the button does fold, but then I get called by both the blinds. So we go 3 ways to a flop of 8-4 deuce with 2 clubs. When the blinds check it over to me, I decide to bet here, more so for equity denial than anything else. So I go ahead and make it 25. then an aggressive small blind calls and the big blind folds. So we're heads up to a turn, which is the queen of clubs putting in the front door clubs. When the small blind checks it over to me, I actually think this is a good spot to continue to barrel. We don't have much equity except for our pair, but if the opponent did call on the flop with any one pair hand that was worse than 8x, I think it's going to be really hard for them to call on this turn, unless they have a club in their hand as well. But even if they do, we can continue to barrel on the river to get them off of that type of hand. So I think it's a really good spot to just have a robust bluffing range, and we don't have much showdown value with only our bottom pair nut low kicker. So I decide to bluff with this hand. I go ahead and make it 40, and then the small blind throws in the call. So not quite what we wanted to see, but hopefully we will have the opportunity to bluff them on the river, and the river is the king of spades. When the small blind checks it over to me again, I think I absolutely have to bluff on this river. They've still got a bunch of pair plus club draw hands in their range, and if they did have a made flush, I think that at least sometimes they would have check raised on the turn. So I think most of their range is going to be those weak one pair hands. So I think it's a good spot to try and bluff them. I go ahead and bet 100. Maybe could size up a bit and just get more folds, but when your opponent's range is pretty weak, you can sort of bet a bit smaller and bluff more efficiently. So I go ahead and bet 100, and then the small blind snap folds. So let's go. You love to see that, raking in this pot with a bluff. A non-spewy, actually good bluff this time. Next hand up, the under the gun straddle is on for at least this one hand. Let's go. The action folds to my small blind with 10-9 of clubs. I raise it up to 40, and then a passive player in the big blind actually 3-bets to 110. The straddle folds, the action's back on me, and I think we have a pretty clear-cut call. I really do hate calling 3-bets out of position, but in this instance, we are getting a good price. And we do have a hand that's going to do pretty well, even if the opponent does have a stronger range. You know, I would rather call here with 10-9 suited than King-Jack offsuit, for example. So I do throw in the call, and we are heads up to a flop of Jack-9-3 with 2 diamonds and 1 club. I check it over to the villain. They go ahead and c-bet 75, and I think we have a pretty clear-cut call here. We're going to be ahead of all of their bluffs, and even if we are behind, we have a bunch of outs to get there on the turn, plus the backdoor straight draw, flush draw, so pretty clear-cut call with this hand. Didn't really want to raise it for that reason, just because we're kind of like not expecting a better hand to fold. So I do throw in the call, and then we get to see the turn, which is the 4 of diamonds. Pretty bad turn. I check it over to the villain, who goes ahead and bets 125. A smaller bet here, so it is a bit tempting to continue to hero call versus small bet, but I actually think their small bet range still has some really strong hands in it, like overpairs with the diamond, which just are not going to fold to a check raise all in. And so when I think I'm behind and I don't think I'll be able to bluff them off of a better hand, that leaves me with one option. It is the most boring option in any poker vlog, but I think this is a spot where we just have to fold, which is what I do in game. So we've still got the under the gun straddle on, but we are down to 4-handed at this point. All of the 2-5 games are breaking. We're into the Wednesday morning at this point. So I guess the Tuesday fun day is pretty much being over at this point, but still battling 4-handed. And then I'm on the button with 9-8 of hearts. I raise it up to 30, and then only a tight aggressive straddle calls. So we're heads up to a flop of Queen Jack 3 rainbow with 1 heart though. So when the small blind checks it over to me with my gut shot, backdoor flush draw, I think it's a pretty good hand to have as a c-bet bluff in this spot. So I go ahead and make it 20, and then the straddle calls. So we're heads up to the turn, which is the 6 of diamonds. The straddle checks it over to me again, and maybe I'm starting to show a bit of that over-aggression bias yet again, because I get tempted and I go ahead and bet 50 as a bluff here. Not totally in love with it. I have hands that have better equity, stuff that turn backdoor diamonds, and I do think calling out of the straddle, the opponent does have a lot of strong Queen X and Jack X combinations in their range, which I don't know if they're going to fold. I have a bunch of straight draws as well on this board, so it's just not a spot I'm going to get many folds, so really not in love with barreling here. So I go ahead and bet 50. I think it's a bit too aggressive though. And then the villain does throw in the call. So we are heads up to the river, which is the 6 of clubs. The straddle checks it over to me again. Now I think we have a pretty interesting spot, because I think it's very, very likely the opponent does have a Queen X or Jack X combination. And being that they're a tight player, I don't know if those hands are going to want to hang on through 3 streets of barreling, particularly if I go really large on the river. Having said that, absolutely no shame in giving up a bluff if you do think your opponent has a strong range. I just like to go for it in this instance. I bet 215, and honestly, if I had this decision back, Maybe I'd check, but I think if I was going to bluff, I would actually go much bigger than 215. I mean, sure, it's an overbet of the pot, but like, is he really going to fold like king queen and ace queen to like a slight overbet of the pot? I think I really should be going somewhere north of 400 here, just to really put the fear of God into the type player. Try to represent an overpair, a full house, or a 6x combination. I just don't think 215 is going to do it. And then the opponent is in the tank, couple of seconds, and then they ask me why so much, as they kind of giggle, and then pretty quickly after they say that, they do throw in the call, which is bad news. I end up showing my hand and they end up showing ace queen offsuit. So really kicking myself that one, I got too overly aggressive with the triple barrel, but also two, that I kind of didn't get more aggressive, because I really don't know if a type player is going to be able to call down here with ace queen if I did like really go with like a 2x overbet. So definitely some food for thought, and maybe something we can all learn from my shitty bluff in this instance. All right, let's try to bounce back and play this next hand less tilted. We are 5-handed at this point. One of the players came back and they actually opened the small blind to tight aggressive player to 35. And then I'm in the straddle with 7-6 offsuit. Definitely wanted to be defending a lot here, getting to play the pot in position. And I think 7-6 offsuit is strong enough to defend in this instance. So that's what I do. And we are heads up to a flop of 7-4 deuce with all clubs. We do have the 6 of clubs, so we flop top pair and a flush draw. Pretty good. So when the small blind checks it over to me, definitely want to get a bit of value here. I go ahead and make it 20, and then the small blind calls. So we're heads off to a turn, which is the jack of spades. Small blind checks it over to me again. And now I'm wondering if this is a spot where it's kind of too thin to go for value. I mean, a lot of my opponents, Broadway cards with the club X, are probably going to fold if I continue to barrel, unless it's a nut flush draw specifically. Plus, we do run the risk of them turning those hands into a bluff with a check raise. But I think it's a good spot to just check here and then potentially induce bluffs on the river. So that's what I do. I check, and then we get to see that free river, which is the 2 of diamonds. And then the small blind leads out for 125. So a big overbet of the pot. Now, I did check on the turn to try and induce a bluff on the river. So, like, maybe it's worked and we should just throw in that call, but I am actually pretty concerned that I'm behind here. I think it's pretty likely, being out of position, the opponent would check a lot of their overpairs on this board, and when I check back the turn, it's like so obvious they have the best hand, so they really can use that large sizing for value. I think a flush is a little bit less likely, but not totally impossible, because it follows the same train of logic that you would with an overpair. So, and Jack X, same thing, could be behind. They could also have a 2, so we really do lose to a lot here. Having said that, the reason I am tempted to call here is we bet really small on the flop. A lot of their cards that are like king queen offsuit, ace jack offsuit, 10-9 offsuit, that have a club in them, are going to call to my small bet, and then they're going to be kind of like forced to turn their hands into a bluff. So if that's true, they're actually going to have an extremely wide bluffing range. So that makes it very, very tempting to call in this spot. I was really torn, and I was in the tank probably a good 45 seconds or so, which is pretty rare for me, because I really don't like tanking and try not to do it too much for myself, because it's bad for the game. But I just get the notion in my head, the opponent's going to turn over ace jack, and I'm going to be like, wow, what a spew. Really not trying to be tilted or spewed. So I do end up folding this hand, and then the opponent asks me, do I want to see? And straight away I know that they're bluffing, because like they're not going to just say that and then turn over the nuts. So I'm like, go ahead, show me what you got. And then he does show the 9-8 offsuit with no club. So they were actually turning a hand without a club into a bluff. Their bluffing range is going to be so wide here. They're absolutely crushing us in this spot if we're folding a hand as strong as a flop top pair. Really kicking myself, but I got to be honest with these hands and report them back to you guys. Disappointing to see the bluff there, but hey, it is what it is, I suppose. Next hand up, we are still 5-handed, and then a tight aggressive cutoff / under the gun player goes ahead and raises it up to 30, and then I'm on the button with queen jack of clubs. I 3-bet to 90, and then the cutoff throws in the call. So it heads up to a flop of 6-5-3 with 2 clubs. The cutoff checks it over to me with our massive flush draw here and 2 overcards. Want to go ahead and say bet bluff in this spot, essentially trying to fold out my opponent's ace-x combinations or just Broadway cards in general. So I go ahead and make it 75. Then the cutoff check raises to 250. So this is a really gross spot now because I am pretty convinced that the opponent either has an overpair or a flush draw, and I only started the hand with 550 in my stack, so I'm not just flatting this and playing a turn, like I'm either all in or folding. And then Villain starts talking and he goes on about, "You are definitely behind, bro. I'm way ahead of you. You should fold." And I'm like, "I do believe you, but I have a flush draw here." He says, "Well, if you got a flush draw, you're definitely behind." Don't really read too much into the talking. I still think his range is mostly over pairs and flush draws. And I just think against that range, it includes a lot of flush draws that have us dominated. We really can't be continuing with this hand, which is really frustrating because we flop so much equity, but we've just been blown off it in this spot. And I do decide to fold my hand, and then fortunately the cutoff was actually kind enough to show me that they did have ace-9 of clubs. So very happy that we did make the fold here. Pretty gross flop for us, but yeah, we end up making the best of it and not getting a maximum cooled here. After this hand, we decided to break the game. I was pretty tilted about how the end of the session went, particularly some of the spewy plays I made. So I thought it was a good time to wrap up and limit damages before things got much, much worse. So ended up cashing out my chips and then heading back to the hotel room. So there you go. Those were the most interesting hands I played across both the sessions at the Parx Casino. Family was arriving by plane from Florida the next day, so I had to link up with them, deliver some of the stuff that I'd driven up in my car, and also help them get ready for the wedding in a few days from there. Didn't get another chance to play at Parx, unfortunately, because I did really like the poker room. It was absolutely gorgeous inside. I got some footage from inside the casino, and it's really, really good looking one. I would say it's on par with the Tampa Hard Rock, which I've always gone on about how gorgeous I think that one was. The thing that did disappoint me about these games, I went in with such high expectations. Tuesday's meant to be the day where all the 10-10 games up, and there was 4 different 10-10 games running, and as a trickle-down effect, there was 12 different 2-5 games running, which is awesome. You absolutely would never see that on Florida on a random Tuesday afternoon. So that was really cool. The thing that did disappoint me about these games, though, is they were actually really, really tough. I should have been able to sniff this one out before I showed up, but the fact that this joint has the reputation for all the big games running, of course it's going to attract all the best playing professionals from the northeast of the United States. Particularly, it's in such a central location to New York, Pennsylvania, the DC area, even Ohio's not that far away. It's just going to have so many good professionals going here on a Tuesday to grind. And I really noticed that games were playing very aggressive. There was lots of 3-betting, 4-betting, check raising. I mean, it is good sometimes to mix it up with some people who are playing really well, but it was a bit disappointing for me to drive all the way to Philadelphia to just essentially play in a tougher 2-5 game than I would be able to find in Florida. Other than that, though, I did get in 7 hours and 15 minutes of play across both the sessions. In terms of how I feel about my play, it is a vast improvement on how I played in North Carolina. I was significantly less tilted and spewy. Still definitely did have some discipline issues. The entire 5-3 suited hand is pretty spewy, should be folding pre-flop. The river bluff, probably not a great spot either, particularly when I had the aggressive table image. And the 9-8 suited triple barrel bluff I really hate. I think I should be giving up on the turn most of the time, but if I do go forward on the turn, I absolutely need to drop a hammer on the river. Betting slightly over pot is not big enough. I need to go over 400 to really put the fear of God into the type player. But as played, it's a complete punt, and I honestly probably played the hand in like the nut low way possible. So I really can't go super high with my gameplay grade. Got a lot of work to do to get back to my A grade. I think I'll give myself a C for this session, and it is a vast improvement off of the F grade I got in North Carolina, but it's such a long way to go if I want to get back to playing my A game for the rest of this road trip. Despite subpar performance, I did have pretty good results, mostly because I won a $1,500 flip with the pocket nines, so I can't complain too much. I did win enough to at least pay for my hotel and a little bit of gas to get up there. So we did have the wedding in a few days up in Philadelphia, but fortunately I was able to scurry out one night and play another poker session, not at Parx though. I actually checked out the Philadelphia Live poker room and I got some table footage from it, so make sure you hit subscribe because that's what my next vlog is going to be about, the next stop on the road trip. But for now, I'm out of here. Peace.